Bonsoir à tous et à toutes et bienvenue à cette cérémonie virtuelle, la remise du Prix littéraire des ambassadeurs de la francophonie en Irlande 2020. Good evening everyone and welcome to this special event, the award ceremony for the Literary Prize of the Ambassadors of the Francophonie in Ireland 2020. Le prix a été fondé par les ambassadeurs en 2016 et vise à souligner le rôle du français comme langue des idées et des valeurs de la francophonie. The prize was established in 2016 and aims to promote the role of the French language as a vehicle for the circulation of ideas and culture throughout the French-speaking world, that is to say, la francophonie. My name is Sinead Mulcahy. I'm the Director of Literature Ireland, an organisation which promotes Irish literature around the world. Littérature Ireland a pour mission d'assurer la promotion de la littérature irlandaise à travers le monde. We have a particularly strong relationship with France. In fact, we've supported over 400 books into the French language. The relationship's not just a one-way one, though. We've also supported translations of French books into English and Irish, including some of the Astérix series into the Irish language. So this year, the prize is being awarded to Paul Lynch for his novel Grace, translated to French by Marina Borazzo and published by Albin Michel. Félicitations. Paul Lynch is the author of 4 novels: Red Sky and Morning, The Black Snow, which won the French Booksellers Prize, Libre à nous, and the Prix des Lecteurs Privats, Grace, which we're celebrating tonight, and Beyond the Sea. His novel Grace was the winner of the Kerry Group Irish Novel of the Year and was shortlisted for the Walter Scott Prize and the Prix Jean Monnet for European Literature, among several other prizes. It was a Book of the Year in The Guardian, The Irish Independent, Kirkus, and Esquire. It was also an editor's choice in the New York Times book review pages, and the Washington Post called the book a moving work of lyrical and at times hallucinatory beauty. Literature Ireland's partnership with the prize awards a residential bursary to the winning translator. Notre partenariat avec ce prix offre une bourse résidentielle en Irlande au traducteur gagnant, dans ce cas, la traductrice Marina Borazzo. And Marina, we really look forward to welcoming you to Ireland, hopefully in the near future. I'm now going to invite the Ambassador of France in Ireland, Son Excellence Stéphane Crouzat, to present the prize to Paul.
Eh bien, bonjour à tous. Absolument ravi d'être ici ce soir réunis de manière virtuelle pour présenter ce prix des ambassadeurs francophones. First of all, what is la francophonie? Francophonie. C'est un mot qui désigne d'abord tous ceux qui ont le français en partage, ce qui représente dans le monde quelques 300 millions de personnes. Some 300 million people actually speak French in the world, and it's going to become even more so with the development of Africa and so many people speaking French in Africa in particular. Et puis ça désigne aussi une organisation, l'Organisation internationale de la francophonie, qui comprend aujourd'hui quelques 88 pays, 88 countries belonging to the Organisation internationale de la francophonie. Et ce sont des pays qui ont décidé depuis 1970 de se réunir pour promouvoir le français, la diversité culturelle, linguistique, la coopération universitaire, les valeurs de tolérance et de paix. And we're celebrating this year, 1970, we're celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Francophonie. And we're particularly delighted that Ireland has decided to join Francophonie as an observer in 2018. So we're now a big family with observers, members, 88 countries. Et donc en Irlande, nous fêtons chaque année, au printemps, la francophonie avec les ambassades des pays francophones en Irlande. Et il y a près d'une trentaine d'ambassades qui représentent les pays de la francophonie en Irlande. So almost 30 embassies in Ireland represent member countries of the francophonie. And now, of course, we have the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, which represents Ireland with us in the organizing committee of the festival. And during the festival, for the last 4 years, we meet up, the ambassadors, to choose a book that has recently been translated into French. And that's the Prix des Ambassadeurs francophones. So the way it works is Literature Ireland gives us a short list of books that have recently been translated into French. And we decide based on 2 criteria, the quality of the book itself, of course, but also the quality of the translation. Et c'est ça qui est très important, c'est d'avoir la bonne adéquation entre la qualité du livre et la restitution par le traducteur ou la traductrice. And so this year we met in February. We had a very nice lunch at one of our colleagues, ambassador, for a very lively discussion, sometimes a heated discussion. But the idea is to come up with a consensus. And we had some 4 wonderful books, in fact, but the consensus was reached to choose Paul Lynch for Grace, for the quality of the work, and also for the quality of the translation by Marina Borazzo. So it is my great privilege and my great pleasure, in the name of all the ambassadeurs des pays de la francophonie en Irlande, to award the prize this year to Paul Lynch and his translator Marina Borazzo for Grace. Toutes mes félicitations.
Les ambassadeurs de la francophonie en Irlande, Monsieur Paul Lynch, to say a few words of acceptance.
It is with gratitude that I accept this award, though I must do so with the caveat I am only half responsible for the work. George Steiner once said that without translation, we would be living in provinces bordering on silence. When I think of the many writers in languages other than my own who have shaped my thoughts and influenced my work, I might mention Voltaire's Candide and Dante's Inferno with regard to Grace. I, like many others, have taken those translations for granted. But it is the spell work of translation that allows us to leap from us to other, to enter fully into that alien culture as easily as though we were passing through our own. The novelist knows that translation is fraught with danger, that each sentence for the translator is reading and approximation, of shades of meaning being flattened or erased, of that local twist of the tongue being twisted out of shape. And what about the writer's style, the rhythm and song of a book, that ineffable substance that is the most difficult of all to capture? Translation is the cleansing fire that puts the truth of a novel to the test. But sometimes, too, a book may even be improved by translation, that the original becomes unfaithful to the translation, as Borges once said. Gabriel Garcia Marquez once remarked that the English translation of 100 Years of Solitude had improved the original. And I too have my suspicions that my translator Marina Borazzo has diffused gossamer throughout my books. Marina has her own stories to tell about the translation of Grace, and once joked that during the translation of my novel Red Sky Morning, she considered quitting the translation entirely and opening up a tea shop. It is an act of heroism to enter into a work and render it true in another language. And I remain in awe of Marina's ability to give me a voice in French that endeavors to say not just what I said, but to say it the way that I said it, as though I had written it in French. Over a long lunch in Toulouse a few years ago, we discussed books and arrived at a wonderful convergence. We share a deep love for the same writers, from William Faulkner and the authors of the American Southern Gothic, to the Latin American novelists, both of us prizing Juan Rulfo's Pedro Páramo as a book close to our hearts. So in Marina, I have a kindred spirit for the road, a translator with a sensibility that mirrors my own. Marina was brought in to work upon my novels by my French editor Francis Geffard at Albin Michel. In France, Francis is revered as a brilliant publisher, a man of energy, vision, and passion. And I must offer my thanks both to him and Albin Michel for taking that leap of faith with regard to my work. 5 years ago, while walking along Saint-Germain with my wife, I was stopped in my tracks, having met a photo of myself in a bookshop window. That is something I will never forget, and it has truly been one of the great pleasures in my life to see my work celebrated in France. I would like to extend my thanks to Sinead McKay and Literature Ireland, an organisation that does great and important work in the promotion of Irish literature abroad, and to the international organisation of La Francophonie for making this award possible. I am greatly honoured. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul. And of course, as Paul has said, the book would not be available in France were it not for great publishers such as Albin Michel. So I'd now like to call on Francis Geffard, éditeur des collections, from Albin Michel, to say a few words about the novel and about its reception in France. Francis.
For a very long time, France has had a strong relationship with Ireland. French people love Irish music, Irish poetry, and Irish literature. So it was not so much of a surprise that the work of such a distinguished Irish writer such as Paul Lynch was well received, but we were overtaken by the response of readers to his work. First with Un ciel rouge le matin, Red Sky in Morning, then with La neige noire, The Black Snow, and then with Grace. And j'avoue que la première fois où j'ai lu le travail de Paul Lynch, j'ai été saisi par son rapport à la langue. Et on voit combien sa langue a quelque chose presque de tellurique, d'organique. Et dans tous ses livres, y compris dans Grace, on sent la richesse de sa vision, de son vocabulaire, la façon dont il convoque des forces qui nous dépassent, parce que le monde et l'univers des livres de Paul Lynch est à la fois le monde réel, le monde visible et le monde invisible également. Et cette poésie, ces images, cette parfois sombre qui se dégage de ces livres, vraiment, il ne cesse d'augmenter son public après avec la parution de ces titres en format de poche, et il a vraiment gagné en France un lectorat assez conséquent, et nous nous réjouissons de la façon dont les lecteurs français l'ont reçu. Et avec Grace, évidemment, c'est un roman irlandais par excellence, faisant revivre à travers le destin tragique d'une jeune fille contrainte à courir trop vite dans un monde, et l'Irlande au milieu du 19e siècle, qui a causé tant de morts et provoqué l'exil de tant d'Irlandais, d'Irlandaises et d'Irlandais. Eh bien, il a su donner à cette expérience particulière une résonance universelle. Et je crois que le pouvoir de la grande littérature, c'est à la fois de savoir nous emmener dans un endroit bien précis, mais aussi de donner à cette histoire une dimension universelle. Et je crois que la force d'un écrivain, c'est avant tout le pouvoir de ses mots. Et ce soir, je salue le travail de Paul Lynch, le regard qu'il porte sur la vie et sur le monde. Je salue aussi l'action que Sinead mène auprès des éditeurs français et des auteurs français. Et je crois que nous sommes ce soir un peu tous entre amis, amis de la littérature, amis des mots et amis du monde. Voilà, j'aimerais conclure sur cette note et dire que nous nous réjouissons chez Albin Michel de publier à la prochaine rentrée littéraire en 2021 la traduction française de son dernier livre, Beyond the Sea. Voilà, je rends la parole à Sinead McCodem.
Merci Francis. Nous sommes tous, comme vous dites, des amis de la littérature. Et ici, j'ai un message de la part de Marina Boraza, qui malheureusement n'a pas pu nous joindre ce soir. So I have here a message of congratulations from the translator Marina Borazo, who was unfortunately not able to join us today because of a previous engagement. Bonjour à tous. J'adresse mes plus sincères remerciements aux ambassadeurs de la francophonie et à Literature Ireland pour l'intérêt qu'ils ont témoigné au travail de Paul Lynch et au mien. Je suis d'autant plus sensible à la réception de ce prix, car je garde une affection particulière pour Grace, un magnifique roman qui fait incontestablement partie de mes expériences de traduction les plus passionnantes. L'imaginaire riche et cohérent de Paul Lynch, sa constante inventivité linguistique, offre aux traducteurs une belle part de créativité. Et je suis heureuse d'avoir pu amener ce superbe texte vers la langue française et de lui avoir assuré ainsi un plus large lectorat. Je profite enfin de cet événement pour rendre hommage à tous les traducteurs talentueux qui m'ont si souvent permis d'accéder à des ouvrages exceptionnels dont je ne maîtrise pas la langue d'origine. Je vous renouvelle tous mes remerciements. Bien cordialement, Marina Borazo. So that's the message of congratulations to Paul Lynch from his French translator, Marina Borazo. So I'd now like to call on Professor Clíona Ní Riordáin to carry out a short interview with Paul Lynch, winner of the Prix Littéraire des Ambassadeurs de la Francophonie en Irlande, followed by your questions. Et maintenant, j'invite Madame Clíona Ní Riordáin, qui s'en tiendra avec Paul Lynch, suivi par vos propres questions sur le chat. Clíona.
Thank you, Sinead. Good evening, Paul, and congratulations for the award that you've received tonight. One of many awards that have saluted your wonderful book that Le Monde called Un roman d'une rare délicatesse, where you managed to look at la renaissance de l'Irlande exsangue mais non vaincue. So Ireland, which had lost its blood but which was not defeated. And I wondered if you could explain to us where the idea from Grace came to you from.
It's a long answer, which I'll try and give it to you in a short response. So I must begin with my first novel, which was a book called Red Sky and Morning, and that was set in Donegal in 1832, and it was ostensibly about a man who's hunted out of Ireland and leaves behind a family, a wife and a daughter. And shortly after that book's publication, I was being interviewed by a journalist of the Irish Times, and she said to me, would you consider writing a sequel to this book? Because there was this voice in that book belonging to Sarah, the mother in that book. There's her voice appears in, I think, three sections. She said that voice, it was just so powerful that could be another novel. And I kind of laughingly dismissed it out of hand. And I said, firstly, the idea of the family saga, that's Sebastian Barry's territory, and that's something he does so beautifully that I just don't want to step into that territory. But also it just seemed that I was done with Donegal. At the time, I just finished writing my second novel, The Black Snow, and so I felt me and Donegal were going to part ways. But I had this idea for a novel, and all I knew was that there was this voice, this quivering of a 14-year-old girl. I knew it was going to be on the roads. I knew nothing else other than that. But I sat down to write. I'm working on an outline of the book, just working on the opening pages. And I realized that this girl is 14, that she has a mother, that she has a younger brother, and that she is the child of Col Coil from Red Sky and Morning. And as soon as I realized that, I tried to not write this book. Because there's something that happens then is if she's the child of Col Coil and she's 14, then we're entering into the famine. she's 13, 14, she's entering into the famine. And so I wanted to walk away from this project, because why would you take on the famine as an Irish writer? The famine is the one thing that we do not, I think writers, we're innately terrified of it. There are very few novels that have taken it on, and for good reason. It's our national trauma. And so I tried to walk away from it. But interestingly enough, at the same time, for the period of 6 months before that, I had been reading up on Mao's famine in China, because a number of historical novels, historians had been granted access to the archives in China. And Mao's famine, 1958 to 61, 62, and maybe 30 million people were killed, I think, though I think that figure remains somewhat fully unknown, but everything was recorded. And I mean, this was a totalitarian system, so everything was recorded. And I was reading some books just out of the sheer interest of what actually happens in a famine when you can record it in the 20th century. But I came to realize that I'd been researching the famine by proxy. And so this is one of the things that I keep rediscovering about myself, is that as an author, I don't choose the books. My subconscious seems to arrive at these projects for me and seems to steer me towards things that I don't quite fully understand what's at work until until I'm entering into the project, and then the things start to join together. And so when I realized that I was writing a book about the famine, I said I tried to walk away from it, because there's something there that all Irish people feel in our guts. And it's this feeling of shame, of disgust, of self-loathing, anger as well, perhaps. And I realized that it was these feelings that were being summoned by just the even idea of writing this book. And that's, if you're a writer, that's the kind of thing you must pay attention to. Those are the kind of reasons that you must write the book. That's what I learned, is that these feelings of shame and disgust, why was I feeling these, 4 generations later, 5 generations later, many years after the event? I have, as far as I know, no association to it. My grandparents never spoke about it. Why was I feeling these things? And so that became really the deeper impetus about entering into the famine in this novel. And what I discovered is that there is I think a silent transmission that carries through us, and I think it's born out of what we did to survive, what the unspoken things that one would have had to do to survive. And so that was part of the thing about the book. As I wrote my way into it, I realized I would have to open it up all the way down to the bone, that I could not look away from this. I could not flinch. I would have to go all the way into the darkness with Grace, knowing, of course, that she would survive, as she does, because otherwise I think the book would be impossible. But I had to go all the way down into that abyss with her to fully understand why we still feel this way now. And that's what happened.
It's powerful stuff. I mean, you're talking about the black hole of trauma, and perhaps an inherited generational trauma. Did it mean that you had to do a lot of research, or were you guided by this voice?
Yeah, I mean, the research is definitely important, but the thing about research when you're a novelist is that you have to forget about it. You talk about this voice, this girl, this 14-year-old girl. Well, as a novelist, I ask myself the question, what can a girl of 14 years old know of her life in terms of, in this book, she is from the lower classes. I mean, she has very little education. She's obviously smart as a whippet, but she hasn't had the opportunity yet in life. And what can she know? And so the danger as a novelist is you can go away and do an enormous amount of research and then front load that research into the book. But this character doesn't understand herself contextually. She doesn't have the an idea of what's happening in the way that we might understand it or think that we might understand it. And so therein is one of the first problems, is that as a novelist, I'm suspicious of interpreted history. I'm suspicious of the different ideological approaches that passes through history as an academic subject. I think that, you know, there's a line at the start of the book: time turns to shining ether to solid angularity of facts, and from Emerson. And that's my starting position is, you know, we can never actually truly know what it was like to be alive in that time. But this is where the novelist comes in. The novelist can be the historian of feeling, the historian of conscience, the historian of the things that are forbidden to historians. And so with Grace, I just entered into her perception, entered into her world, and sought to forget everything that I thought that I knew about the famine. Because historians work by looking backwards, but characters, all of us live by, we move forwards in our lives. Life is unfolding around us. And so my job was to forget all the research, to understand enough of that world to build the physics of that universe. Because you have to create a physics that constructs that universe fully for that character. But then I have to forget it and allow that character, Grace, to unfold moment by moment and just enter into the moment of her life. And that was my goal as I wrote.
I think you managed to walk that line very finely between the character of Grace, who was very archetypal, almost an Antigone figure from Greek tragedy, and then at the same time setting her clearly in the great tragedy of Ireland, which is the famine. And what I think is interesting, Paul, as well, is that one of the other major prizes that exist between Ireland and France, the Michel Déon Prize, the first instance of it being accorded to an Irish writer was to the historian Brown MacSweeney for The End of Outrage, which was a history of the famine. So I don't know whether it's this kind of trauma element that links the two countries or propels it forward, but I thought it was a nice connection. How did you write that woman's voice? You heard it, she dictated it to you?
Oh, I mean, to answer that question now is to try and sort of insert myself between, you know, the pen and the page, or my fingers and you know, and what comes up on the page. And there is an aspect of mystery. I mean, if I fully understood what writing is, you know, I'd probably write a book about it. But I just had her voice. That's all I can say. It just came to me, and my job is to listen. That's the writer's job. When these people come to you, you have to listen. And there was just so many things about her that I felt really compelled by her, that she just seemed to be so wonderfully pure and naive, but also plucky and just determined in a way that I could never be in my own life. And she was just so compelling. I just had to listen to her and follow her. And I remember my wife saying to me, you know, like, because this is also a story. It's a Bildungsroman. It's a coming of age novel. She's 14 at the start. She's about 19 at the end. And, you know, it's also just her development, her coming of age, her arrival into adulthood. And my wife read it, you know, when I was finished the major draft of the book, and she said, you know, she said to me, how did you do that without asking me any questions? And my answer was, well, it's my job. This is my job. Otherwise I wouldn't be doing it. But it is, I think there's an element of mystery about it. And maybe a touch of magic. And, you know, as a writer, you take nothing for granted. When a book comes to you, when a character comes to you, you just seize hold of it and you hold on and you follow them. And it's not, you know, to me, it's not some sort of, it's not a front of brain rational act. It's you're being led by your subconscious. And the more that I write, the more that I see how that seems to be operating through us all the time. This part of our minds that's not visible to us, apart from when we dream, or maybe sometimes when we write or meditate. this aspect to our consciousness is always there. It's always has an idea about who we are and what we should be doing with ourselves, but it's very hard to get a voice, and the noise of the world likes to drown it out. And writing is one of the surest ways of coming in contact with this aspect of our minds. And I say this not as a mystic, but just as, because I'm not, but just with an aspect of wonder, because it's there for all of us. And it is from there that the real work of writing comes from. Because writing is really the work of dream. I think that's fundamentally what it is.
Could I conclude my questions by asking you what this prize, the Prix des Ambassadeurs, means to you?
Well, it's funny, I'm actually more delighted for my translator about getting this, Marina, and I find it interesting that she had words to say about me for this book, because frankly, to me, the prize is really belongs to Marina more than me, because as I said, if it wasn't for Marina, this book is silence in France. This book doesn't exist, and it is Marina's work that doesn't just give this book in French to the French, but it also gives it in my voice, in as close as possible to the way that I write. And I'm told that I have a difficult manner in terms of translating, and she seems to just do that so beautifully. And I've spoken to so many people over the years who are perfectly bilingual, and they speak so highly of her translations. And so I'm just delighted for that reason for Marina, because I think it's recognition for her work, and I think it's really, really fully deserved.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
Perhaps we might open to the questions from the audience, the spectators.
Yes. So, hello everyone. I will read the question from our audience. So we have a first question from the Belgium ambassador to Ireland, who asks, do you write with an Irish audience in mind? And did you realize when you wrote Grace how universal it was?
Interesting question. I think it's very dangerous if you write thinking about who you're writing for, if you write looking over your shoulder. Because once you write like that, your writing becomes, the experiment is interfered with. You are writing to the expectation of people, and so I don't do that at all. Weirdly, I write to a standard that I want to read. That's really what it is. I work on each book very slowly, creating a sound and a rhythm and a feeling of a novel that I actually would be very comfortable reading. And that's my rubric for this thing. I don't think about how a book of mine would be received in Ireland, how it would be received in America or France. It cannot come into my thinking. But one of the things that I am consciously aware of is it's not a decision to go after universal themes, but I'm just deeply interested in questions that concern the human spirit, the kind of eternal questions that remain the same through the ages. I think one of the problems for the contemporary novel is that when you generate the noise of the present, you're really just creating a form of journalism, and that the contemporary novel, is at risk when you write something that is at risk of disappearing very, very quickly. I'm interested in writing books that about what it is to be alive, about the difficulty of life, about the problem of suffering, which is inescapable, about the wonder of our capacity to endure and to sort of, like in Grace, her ability to reintegrate after that enormous trauma, which she does. And she is a reintegrated and kind of extraordinary, almost like not religious, but she has reached a sort of place of profound understanding of the world by the end of that book that I think few of us ever reach. and she can only arrive at that point through what she's experienced. And that's just something that interests me. And I think these things are timeless. These things are things that will always we will always encounter. And that's why when we read the Greeks now, we experience that same recognition in Sophocles as reading him today. And so that's what I'm going for in my work. I'm going after these big, almost unanswerable questions.
Yeats talked about the rag and bone shop of the heart. I think that's where you're going.
Yeah, I agree.
Thank you. Another question from the audience. How do you imagine your Francophone audience?
Yeah, it's interesting. I actually don't have to imagine them because I get to meet them so regularly. Because I travel to France. Well, obviously not at the moment, but I have traveled to France a lot in the past maybe 6 years, 7 years since my first novel came out, and it's been quite wonderful to meet many of them. And it has happened quite a lot that people have told me that they've chosen to travel to Ireland for their holidays because of my novels. And that is an extraordinary thing. And I've met people who've said that they've traveled to Donegal because of the books. And I mean, I find that quite wonderful and also terrifying, because I fled Donegal as a youth. I mean, the idea that someday I would write a novel that would inspire people to go visit the place would have baffled me beyond belief. So I really find French culture to be fascinating. I think it's, in terms of how the French think about literature, I think they do think about it differently than how I've encountered elsewhere. I think the French are much more attuned philosophically to themes in my novels. They really know how to unpack a book. And I find that I encounter that again and again, not just through French journalists in interviews, but also just people I meet who come up to me at book stands at French book festivals, and they want to speak about the book. And it is always an extraordinary experience to hear them tell me their stories about my work. And they're very sharp readers, and it comes from a literary culture that is very, very deep. And when I travel to France, I meet people in the publishing world in France who think that publishing is ending and it's the end of the world. And I have to remind them that compared to elsewhere, it seems like a godsend.
Thank you. Question from the Moroccan ambassador. What will be your next work about?
Well, my next book, which has already been published in English and will be published in France, I think in August next year, is called Beyond the Sea. And it's in some ways very, very different than my other books. And in other ways, it's exactly the same. It's a book set it begins in a fishing village in South America about two fishermen who go out to sea before a storm, and then they are washed out. They are cut adrift on a boat without an engine and left at the mercy of the ocean tides, and they are pulled out into the Pacific Ocean. And as time sort of begins to fall away, the men realize that they are both alive and dead at the same time, because the odds of them being rescued are next to impossible, because they are really adrift in the vastness of the Pacific Ocean. And so what they're really entering into is this sort of existential experiment where the men are being forced to confront themselves, the lives they have led, the people that they've left behind. And they both respond to this event in profoundly different ways. And there's a character called Bolivar, who's essentially a youngster and vastly inexperienced. And he should not have been taken out on that boat, but he was by Bolivar. And Hector does not respond well to this. And he initially turns to religion, but he begins to disintegrate mentally. And Bolivar, meanwhile, is this indifferent, ironic man, a fisherman who has no belief really in anything, who transforms quite extraordinarily, I think, in this book into somebody of great spiritual insight. The book is really about his transformation from this character who is completely different and completely unthinking. And it explores many different kind of ideas of faith and religion and the belief in ourselves. What is it we do to survive? And so in many respects, it's actually very, very close to Grace in terms of the deeper, perhaps Jungian aspect to Grace's character that is also in Bolivar's character. So to me, they're very similar books, but they seem very different. And also, of course, because it's set in South America, I had to take out of my writing all that sort of idiomatic Irish flavour to give it a more neutral sound. So that will come out in France next year.
And I'm sure all of your French readers are looking forward to that.
They better be.
We have a question from someone in the audience. What are usually your relationships with the translators of your books, if you have any?
I mean, we usually have conversations about the book. I mean, Marina always asks me to send me an email at the start of the project, looking to get into my head about perhaps what books had inspired me or what books I was thinking about. Because very often when a writer comes to a book, they have reference points in their head. They sort of go, I'd like this book to have the feel of this book, but also maybe a bit of the attitude of that book, and perhaps a little bit of this one over here. And so you're often, I mean, the book doesn't end up sounding like these books, but they become mentors, perhaps, for ways to approach the book. And so I talked to her about the books that or the poems that I've been thinking about. I also talked to her just about the ideas that are in my head. You know, it's useful because it's after you've written about it, so you can rationalize all these things after the fact. When you're sitting down to write the book, you haven't got a bloody clue what you're doing. You're just, you know, it's like driving a car in the dark and the headlights are shining up the road, and you're following the road, hoping you arrive somewhere interesting. And so that's how it works. And when I first met Marina, I posted her a copy of a Hiberno English dictionary, particularly for Red Sky Morning, because it was really, really dense with that sort of Ulster Scots and Hiberno Irish English. And so, yeah, and then I'll get questions later on, some strange sentences that sometimes I have to go back to the book to read them contextually to see what it was I meant, which is often interesting.
We have a question from the French ambassador. Why do you think your book is so successful in France?
Oh dear. Whatever answer I gave will be the wrong answer. I mean, I think the French do have a very deep interest in the Irish famine and the fact that this is our Shoah, our great traumatic event, and I think they do sympathise with that. But I've also, I mean, you know, for the reasons that I talked about earlier about my writing going after the sort of what I considered sort of the eternal questions. It's been my experience talking to people in France that it's this aspect to my writing that they seem to deeply engage with, the sort of philosophical questions that I'm engaged with, that I go after in every book. They seem to be really open to that, perhaps in a way that is more so than other countries. Also, I might add, and this is only a guess, but you know, in France, like if you look at, say, how the kind of the language, particularly in my first book, where I come from as a writer, is there are different traditions sort of coming to meet behind the language, and one aspect is the lyrical Irish tradition. You know, I mean, I grew up reading Yeats, I grew up reading Joyce, and Heaney became a very, very important poet for me. But also writers of the American Gothic in America, Faulkner and Cormac McCarthy and Flannery O'Connor are writers that I've felt had an enormous impact on me, but also the writers of a sensibility that seems to mirror my own. And in France, these writers are revered. Faulkner and McCarthy are really a large part of the culture, it seems to me. And so they really, I think they grasped what it was that I was trying to do. Perhaps not even trying to do, just what I couldn't help but do, because you don't have a choice. You sound the way you sound. and you know what comes out is really a measure of what you love the most, I think, and what speaks to you. And so I'm sure all of those reasons are absolutely raw, but that's my attempt at answering the question.
We have a question from Delphine Gallagher. So she said you grew up in County Donegal and said earlier on that after your first book you wanted to step away from writing about Donegal. Why is it?
When you leave a place as you know, as an 18-year-old, you're generally leaving it for a reason. And at that time in my life, I was very keen to get to be an urbanite, to get to Dublin, to get into the wider world. I mean, the Donegal that I grew up in at the time, in the 80s and 90s, it was a place that was very remote. In many ways, you sort of felt cut off from the wider world. And I mean, we had BBC television, which was great, and of course RTE, but in many other respects, there's a feeling of growing up, you know, in the 1950s. And I mean, I grew up in a small town, and you know, it's a wonderful place. But when you're 18 years old, that sense of the small Irish town, which is very, very oppressive, where everybody knows everybody, and the sins of the past are always surrounding everybody else, and it's just this sort of suffocation that you want to flee from, and that's very common probably for many Irish writers. So Dublin for me was my escape, and the last thing I expected when I sat down to write was that I would return to Donegal. But what I wanted to do was to write, you know, sophisticated urban novels like Don DeLillo. But you don't get to choose the novels. You don't get to choose your material. It chooses you. And so when I started writing about Donegal, something happened, which was that it became reconfigured in me, that Donegal, the mythology of the place began to fill up the language, the sense of time up there, you know, the boglands and the mountain. There's a feeling of deep time in the landscape that you don't see as an 18-year-old or a 15-year-old when you're living there, but you see it as a writer when you're writing 20 years later or 15 years later. And that sense of electricity, when I felt it enter into the writing, was really important in realizing that I needed to write about Donegal. But what had happened was I wrote then the second novel, and I thought I was done. And then of course Grace came. But after that, I you know, as I said, the fourth novel was set elsewhere, and I did feel the need to get out of Ireland at that point, because, as I said, my themes I'm going after kind of metaphysical themes, big ideas, and sometimes you want a terrain that's going to allow you to do that. And no matter what way you look at it, Ireland it's small. It's you know, it seems to invite sort of the social novel, the social realism. It invites domesticity in fiction, and my imagination is just not. I don't have a domestic imagination, and so I have needed to get out, and so that's fundamentally what it's about.
But in a sense, Paul, when you talk about all of those things, and you referred to Heaney and you referred to Yeats, Ireland may be small, but it goes deep, and you have those sinkholes, those empty, endless bog holes, which seem to have got a grip on you as well.
I completely agree. And I mean, of course, you know, there are many Irish writers who have found a way into the timeless, and you know, as you say, and so I mean, the thing is I mean, the local is universal, as McGahern said, you know, and I mean, I suppose it's not something you choose, and I may even return to Donegal again, but I won't go back there willingly. I'll be pulled back by something. And
some voice.
Yeah, some voice or some void, something that will, you know, something that will just pull me in. and I won't know what it is until I write it. And it's the writing.
The sensation you describe is almost like being haunted.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's a perfect way of putting it. I think many writers would admit to being haunted into writing their novels, and haunted into poetry. You know, there are many different reasons for that, but we're seized upon. The writing of a book begins with a feeling, and this feeling is something that seizes hold of you, and you know you're a writer when that feeling can only leave you by writing it out. And what you discover is that the feeling is something that's, you know, it's not an idea, it's a feeling. It's why we're writers, and around that feeling, all these things nucleate, all these complexities are gathering around the feeling inside you of something, you know, and it's very difficult to articulate. But I really like what you said.
No, it's one of the qualities that I admire. You're a wonderful writer, but you're also very well able to talk about your process, and that's not a quality that every writer shares or wants to share.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that what has aided me in my own self-awareness is that I'm a meditator, and I don't have any. I'm not a Buddhist. I don't follow any specific practice, so to speak. But I've been meditating for a long time now, and I'm take it very seriously. And what that does is it allows you to see yourself at work. You develop a kind of a meta awareness of yourself. And so one of the things that meditation does is it allows you to see your own subconscious in flashes and glimmers. You can, in lightning flashes, you can get up close to it sometimes. You can see that kind of baton pass of the subconscious handing you something. And if you meditate, if you can get down into a place where you can see it happening. And it's hard to describe, and it's even stranger when it's happened to me. But that kind of self-awareness is something that's been built up very, very slowly over the years. And I think it's just allowed me to understand what it is that I do. And I think meditation is essentially the same thing in many respects as writing, because what you're doing is you're turning off all the voices, the idea of the self, this multiplicity of selves that we are, and you're turning them off and you're allowing something else to come through. Mm-hmm. And that might be silence, that might be a character, it might be a feeling for a novel. But it's really just about creating a receptivity that allows something else to come through that is not from you, though of course it is from you. So that's if I have any form of articulation about it, and in truth I doubt that I do, but that's where it comes from.
Okay.
Maybe we have time for two last questions from the audience. The first one is, what was it like when you were writing the final word of grace? Was it a sense of relief and freedom, or rather a feeling of missing your characters and their voices?
That's a great question. From early on in the novel, once I understood what the book was, I knew the last sentence of the book. And so what I was doing is writing towards that sentence, which for me, that sentence contains a universe. And so I'm writing towards something that is the closure of the novel, but is something that's very, very meaningful for me. And so I remember when I finally wrote that sentence, I just became very emotional, really, really emotional. Because also there's just that feeling of, well, I bloody well did it. You know, I wrote the bloody book, because most of the time you just don't know how you're going to do it. And, you know, and the truth is, how do you do it? Well, you just do it in a little piece every day, and you try not to think about the mountain. If you think about the mountain, you'll fall over. But to reach the end is a feeling of, for me, it was the feeling of relief, but also that what was in that line, this life is light. What was in that line was the QED for the novel. I demonstrated the whole book, that line in the whole book, and so it was that full stop was the universe in and so it was emotional for that reason.
Okay, thank you. And maybe one last question. Does this award from Ambassador of Francophonie encourage you to visit and discover more exotic countries of Francophonie and get inspiration for your next book?
I'm always open to invitations abroad, particularly to Francophonie countries, and it's been my absolute, privilege to travel. I've seen an awful lot now of France, and I've been to Belgium, and I've been to Switzerland, and I may even have been wider afield. But the COVID thing now has changed it obviously for everybody, which is very sad. And I think the thing we're all missing is travel. And I think we all need to. The meeting of new people is a lifeblood of social exchange. And even though I spend a lot of time seeking isolation and trying to escape my young children so I can write my books, and avoiding my friends, I also need to meet people, and so I think the next year or two is going to be very tough on a lot of people, and writers have it a lot easier than musicians in particular. I know a lot of musicians, and they're really, really suffering, and there's nothing they can do. So yeah.
Maybe Sinead, if you want to conclude.
Yes. Well, congratulations, Paul. Congratulations, Marina Borazzo. Merci à tous nos invités pour leur participation. Toutes nos félicitations à Paul et à sa traductrice, Marina Borazzo. J'encourage vivement tous nos spectateurs à lire ce merveilleux roman. Et je vous dis à l'année prochaine pour une nouvelle édition du Prix littéraire des ambassadeurs de la francophonie en Irlande. Merci et à bientôt. Au revoir.
Et félicitations. Au revoir.
Au revoir. Congratulations, Paul.
Thank you.
Congratulations.